So this morning we've been talking about standing together. A couple of weeks ago we talked about, hey, do you mind coming get this mic there? Because I know I'm going to kick it and it's going to fly off. Thanks, Rusty. So we've been talking about standing together. A couple of weeks ago we talked about standing as a nation. Talked about if we don't stand as a nation, we're at the tipping point, and if we don't stand up as a church, then we're going to see our nation tip over the top into the direction we don't want to see it tip. And last week we talked about voting God, about standing up and voting God, and not talking about candidates, but we talked about voting God. How many of you looked up Black Ivory coffee and got you a cup this week? If you weren't here last week, that's sort of a thing for my message, but we do thank you if you're a visitor this morning, but I say thank you for coming. I'm talking this morning, I'm shifting gears. So we talked about standing together, but how many know there's some times in life, as others are standing, that there's some times in life that we have to stand alone? It's easy when a whole group of people stand up. It's easy when everybody stands up and everybody's excited and you're fighting for the cause and you're going after it. You know, you got a whole stadium full of people rooting in your direction, but there's some times in life that when nobody's cheering, it's not very much fun. Are you the only one there? Am I the only one been there? It's amazing in our Christian walk, when we first get saved, everybody's clapping and shouting and exciting. You know, we're starting to run the race. You're like, man, we're so proud of you. And at the end, it says there's a great cloud of witnesses. When we get to heaven, man, it's going to be amazing. But it's that middle journey that we get caught up in that's sort of tough. When the cheering stops, and there's some things, and we have some dark moments in our life and it may not even be something that we did wrong. It may just be something that's just going on in our life, and we have to recognize during those moments that we still have a God who loves us and a God who cares for us, that wants to do a lot of things in our life, but we are not the only ones, and you're not the only one that you may have in those moments in your life that you're in good company, because there's some people in the Bible we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to talk about some practical things and how we can get over it. Is that okay? So I'm going to sort of teach. I'm going to preach at the beginning and teach at the end. Is that okay? If you don't like it, then it's okay. You'll get with it and you can leave it noonish and it will be okay. But sometimes we have to stand alone. Sometimes we feel lonely. And I picked out this scripture just because I thought it was a great example of somebody who stood alone. We all like Elijah in the Bible. He did great miracles. He did some awesome things. But in James, it says that Elijah was just like a man or woman, and he wasn't like a woman, but you know, Elijah was just like a man, just like me and you. There was nothing special about Elijah. The Bible said there was nothing special about Elijah. He just had a relationship with God that was awesome. There was nothing special about him. James says there was nothing special about Elijah. And yet he called down fire from heaven, burned up the altar, and different other things, you know, and God did some awesome things to his life. He beat Ahab's chariots. I mean, he did some awesome things. He was a hunted man because he was so hated because of his faith in God. And so, but here he goes. He says after he's done all these miraculous things, he finds himself in the wilderness in 1 Kings chapter 19. I'm going to read it. It's going to be up on the screen. I'm going to move through these fast so I can get to the heart of my message this morning. It says, there he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? I'll be honest with you. I know what he was doing. He was being hunted and he was having a little pity party. How many of you ever just had a little pity party? How many of you, I know it's an old sitcom, but how many of you ever remember that show, Everybody Loves Raymond? How many of you remember the episode where Deborah sits on the couch and she's crying and Raymond doesn't understand why she's crying? She said, there's some days I just like to cry and listen to music. It makes me feel better. There's some days that everybody likes to have somewhat of a little pity party. But how many know that there's some people that live in a pity party, or they live in loneliness or depression every day? And I'm not criticizing them, because we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but we have to understand that Elijah was going through something in his life, and he was saying, man, and let's get into what he said. He said, I have been very jealous for you, Lord. He's talking to God, saying here, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant. He said, man, there's nobody else living the life that I'm living, God. Nobody else is doing anything for you. They're all a bunch of lazy people out there. I'm living a holy life. I'm doing what you're telling me to do. I'm trying to be obedient, calling fire down from heaven. Yeah, it's great. But he said, there ain't nobody else out there. I'm the only one left. Have you ever felt like that? You look around at the world and say, man, I'm the only one trying to live like a Christian. Maybe you've never said that. He said, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left. And they seek my life to take it away. I'm the only one left. He was having a moment of loneliness. He was having a moment of he feeling abandoned. He was having a moment where he said, at one point he said, I don't really care if I live or die. Even a great man of God, Joseph, I'm just going to go through some of these. Joseph, we see in his family, his brothers sold him into slavery. He was in a pit, and anybody know how long Joseph lived in that life? 13 years he lived in prison. He had done nothing wrong. He had said nothing wrong. He was living for God. He had a dream and told his brothers, and his brothers totally sold him out. He had been, he got he got a favorable position with Potiphar. She lied about him, put him back into prison. Then he had the cupbearer and the bread maker, the chief chef, and they said, oh, yeah, we'll get you out. But he lived there for 13 years. He was alone, or he felt alone. I mean, no matter how big your dream is sometimes, that you will go through moments, even no matter God has promised you some stuff, that after 13 years that you may give up on that a little bit. You're not supposed to give up on it. You're supposed to stay through to the end. But I'm telling you, you may go through some things where after 13 years you're thinking, well, God, what's going on here? Or how many of you ever asked the question, God, what have I done wrong? Y'all with me? David sitting in the cave is being chased, cut off. I can't even imagine David's life. Every time he turned around, he's being chased, thrown into caves. How long was David in caves? A little over 13 years. I don't know what the 13 is. I'm just telling you. 13 years he lived in cave. He killed Goliath. Did some awesome things. Led Israel in many victories and things, but for 13 years he was chased, ran down by Saul. John the Baptist, after living all those things as a disciple, he lived through everything else, but at the end of his life, after he had seen all the miracles, they tried to boil him in oil. It didn't work. Like I said, I would like to see that. I don't know about you, but I just think that would be cool. They put him in oil. It's like, I don't know if they cooked chicken beforehand, and they just tried to, I don't know how that worked, but it didn't work. Bad joke. I'm sorry. I guess I'll just move on. But then in the last part of his life, he lived in exile on the Isle of Patmos. He was alone, and yet he wasn't alone. Then we get to the last one here, or two. We got Paul. He all alone in prison for most of his life. He wrote most of the New Testament, give us a lot of the scriptures that inspire us, that lead us, that show us to keep going on and on and on. He was not free to come and go. He was always in chains. But in his life, he was alone. It even talks about some people have abandoned me, have done this and this and this. He had moments of feeling alone. And then we have Jesus at the end. I talked about that a little bit during communion, but Jesus lived a life where he had everything around him, and yet he took moments to be alone on purpose to be with his Father. But there was moments at the end of his life at the cross when everybody abandoned him. I also remember the one time that there was over 20,000 people with him, and he started talking about the truth of the Word of God, and everybody abandoned him except his disciples. You're talking about killing a church. 20,000 members, and you speak the truth, and he has 13 left. It's amazing when you speak the truth, what happens? They loved him when he was feeding them. When he gave them something that was hard to chew, they didn't like it no more. But he left, everybody abandoned him, but he even, in Matthew 27:46, it says, and about the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus had a moment where he asked God, why have you forsaken me? So if you're feeling lonely, if you have some things in your life right now that you're going through a situation that you're feeling lonely, you're in good company. But it's what we do in those alone moments. It's what we do in those times of feeling lonely and depressed and all those things. That what we do in those moments is going to decide our future. The reason I'm preaching this message is because I was going to preach something else, but God changed it to this morning. So I know there's some people here or online watching that are feeling lonely. You're feeling depressed. You're feeling like nobody around you cares or nobody else around you has anything to offer you. I'm telling you, that is not the truth this morning. So let's get into it. Did you I put being alone versus being lonely. There's a difference between aloneness and loneliness. How many of you know that? There's a difference between being alone. How many of you like to be alone? There's some moments, you can tell that I eat lunch a lot. But I'm telling you, there's some days, I don't like to go to restaurants alone. There's some days that I like to eat alone. That's my only moment of quietness. Sometimes I like to sit there and drink my tea and just think about something. But I also like to be alone in a deer stand. I like to hunt. I like that kind of stuff. I love doing that. There's some times where I like being alone, but I don't like being lonely. There's a difference. So we're going to get into the difference. Alone means that you are by yourself in a physical sense. Alone means that you're by yourself in a physical sense. There is no one there with you. It can be a good thing when you want some peace and quiet, or a bad thing when you're alone in a dark, dangerous alley. I don't like to be alone in a dark, dangerous alley. If you do, then you're weird. But either way, it's physical. However, loneliness is a state of mind. I need you to hear this. Loneliness is a state of mind. Loneliness is a state of mind. It's a feeling of having no one to turn to, having no one who loves you, and can easily become a state of despair. Loneliness can be experienced when you're alone or when you're completely surrounded by people. How many of you know that you can be surrounded in a room full of people and you can put that fake smile on and that fake mask that sometimes we wear like everything is okay, but you can be the most lonely person in the whole room? You can be surrounded by people and still be lonely. My heart goes out to you this morning if you feel that way. It says that we are going to go through things, and David said it like this. He says that sometimes we will go through the valley of the shadow of death. But let me just tell you that it is not death itself. It's just the shadow of it. But I do know this, when it gets cloudy and it starts to rain and the clouds cover the sky, that after a while the sun breaks through the clouds and it's shiny again. We may have to weather the storm, but the sun never goes away. It's still behind there. And when he breaks through, everything changes. The storm in your life goes away, and the clouds will give way to the light of the sun every time in your life if you'll allow it to. There's no reason today to leave here lonely in your life. There's no reason to live here lonely. Loneliness is a real thing. How many of you listen to the radio? How many of you are song or music buffs? How many genres talk about being lonely? Lots. How many of you listen? I used to listen to country music growing up. And I'm telling you what, if you want to get into some crazy feelings, you listen to that for about 4 hours. I mean, everything in your life has died or left you. That's the reason we have the blues. I mean, you like jazz. Get you a nice whatever you're drinking there and listen to the blues. Man, I'll tell you what, you can work yourself into a slump. I mean, but listen to me, for somebody to write the song means that somebody has felt that way. The reason you connect to the song is because you have felt that way. You remember a time. Clint Black used to sing a song, "Isn't it funny how a melody can bring back a memory?" When you're listening to that song, how many of you were in a good mood at one time and you'll listen to one of those songs and you'll be thinking, man, she left me. You were in a good mood. It flipped like that. Loneliness. That's probably not good. So here we go. I'm going to go through some of these faster. There's two things. Social loneliness. Social loneliness is temporary and usually results from changing social circumstances. I'm teaching a little bit because some of you don't know why that you're lonely. So I'm going to explain some of it. Sometimes moving, death, or divorce, our social life takes a hit. We don't know where we can fit in anymore, so we feel lonely. But there's also another one called emotional loneliness. Emotional loneliness is a long-term chronic loneliness that is not situation-based. People are not suffering. People that are suffering with emotional loneliness tend to become preoccupied with themselves and their problems. Does that make sense to you? A lot of times people are lonely. The reason that they're lonely is because they become so preoccupied by what they're going through that nothing else seems important to them. If you are lonely this morning, I'm not talking down to you this morning. I'm talking to you because this is what happens in all of our lives when we feel these moments. They become rigid in their behavior patterns and act in ways that will keep them lonely. How many of you know when you start having a pity party, you will make sure that nobody can cheer you up? Hey, how's your day? Shut up. Get away from me right now. You're just irritating me. If you want to be in a pity party, you will be in a pity party. But some people like to be in a pity party because they like the attention. So make sure that if you're always in a pity party or you're always feeling that way, that you're not the cause of it because you're keeping everybody else that wants to help you out. Listen to me, here we go. Typically, they blame themselves and their personal traits rather than circumstances for their loneliness. They are convinced that there is little or nothing they can do to improve their situation. Most of the time, there's not. That's the reason you have to depend on God. They believe that they have only two choices. One of them is resign themselves to isolation and misery and learn how to endure it. How many of you know that doesn't sound very good? I'm just going to resign myself to isolation. I'm just going to be alone, and I'm going to learn how to endure this situation. How many know that's not going to work out very long? That's a pretty miserable life. Pretty miserable life. Number two, maintain some measure of hope while waiting until someone rescues them. That's what most people tend to do. So why do we get loneliness? Let me just tell you this, just some myths about things. Some people say, well, women are lonelier than men, or men are lonelier than women. Loneliness is not gender specific. How many of you know that? There's just as many men that are lonely, there is women that are lonely. If you're a man, you might not think that. If you're a woman, you might not think that, but that is true. How many of you know that loneliness is not age specific? A lot of people think that our elderly population are the most loneliest people in the world. No, it's not age specific. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Loneliness is not single or married specific. You can be single and just be as happy as anybody else. And you could be married and be as happy as anybody else. Or you could be married and just be miserable too. And so anyways, loneliness has nothing to do with being an introvert or an extrovert. It doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert. It's not specific. You can be lonely either way. Most people think, well, if you're an introvert, that you're not gonna, that you're just a lonely person. That's not true. They can be some of the most happiest people because they're independent and they don't need a whole lot of people. Are you with me? So here we go. Everyone sometimes in life is lonely, but let's look at the fact of a recent Gallup poll. I've got some facts here. 1 in 4, let me just tell you this, 1 in 4 feels extremely lonely at least one day a month. 1 in 4 says that they feel lonely at least one day a month. 1 in 6 Americans confesses that they do not have a single friend to talk to about their personal problems. Let me just tell you this is where us as Christians step in. I would hate to know that 1 in 6 Americans couldn't look around and see one of our lives and say, man, there's something different about us that I feel like I could talk to them about. But it says 1 in 6, they feel like they don't have anybody to talk to. A study by the American Council of Life Insurance reported that the loneliest group in America is college students. College students. You would think that they had, it looks like they're having a great time. But it says that they're the loneliest group. The next on the list is divorced people. The next is people on welfare recipients. The next thing is single mothers. Another is housewives. The last is the elderly. Isn't it funny that we always think that old people are lonely, but they're the last ones on the list? College students that you think that have their whole life in front of you are some of the loneliest people. The reason I'm sharing that Gallup poll with you is because now you know what to look out for. Some people that you think that have it all going on in their life may be the most loneliest people in the room. What are the causes of loneliness? And we're going to go to some other things, but I feel like these are important, so hang with me. Feelings of rejection. What causes loneliness? Feelings of rejection. Many people have rejected, criticized, and laughed by family members or people in their lives. You feel ignored, you feel rejected because of this, and you have some very deep inner wounds. So, number one, what causes loneliness is feelings of rejection. Number two is insecurity. They are people who have very low self-esteem. They do not love or accept themselves, so they reason. The reason I'm sharing some of these too is because some of these things in our lives as Christians, we need to identify, be able to point out, and be able to help people. Number three, sorrow or tragedy. When someone experiences the loss of a loved one through death or divorce, especially a spouse, loneliness becomes a very real problem. Most people that experience sorrow, tragedy, or loss want to be left alone. Something that no one understands what they're going through. Separation from family or friends. This is where your college student comes in. Or maybe you have a job or military. Whenever you are away from your family and friends, it's a natural tendency to be lonely. You can't wait to get back home to see them again. The cause of loneliness is common to those who are salesmen or truck drivers serving in the military, or patients in hospital for a prolonged time or nursing homes. This is a fun one. Some of you think, a lot of people in our society think because you're rich that you have everything, there's no way that you can be lonely, but one of the things on the list is a position of leadership. I mean, some of our CEOs and our companies in the United States are some of the most loneliest people because who are they talk to? You got all your coworkers to talk to, but they have to make decisions that doesn't make them very popular sometimes. Some of them are lonely. How many times last time you asked your boss, hey man, how are you doing? Because usually you talk to all the other coworkers about how they are doing. I'll say that again. Sometimes you talk to all the coworkers how they are doing, but you haven't asked them how they are doing. How many of you know, and I'm not saying this because of me, I'm not lonely this morning, but how many of you know that pastors and missionaries, and sometimes they're some of the most loneliest people too in the world? I'm not saying that because I need a card this week. Because sometimes we have to make decisions for people that talk to people, and we hold a whole lot of things in that we just don't know how to. We can't tell everybody else. How many of you like to come talk to me and me tell everybody else about how you're doing? So we hold a whole lot of things in, but we don't have a whole lot of things to put out. So loneliness, position of leadership. If you've ever been in leadership, you felt that. The next one is selfishness. To be perfectly honest, there are some people that are lonely that only have themselves to blame. It is their own fault that they are lonely. These people push others out of their lives by being one self-centered. These people are unwittingly do things that prevent them from feeling close to others. They monopolize the conversation. They tend to be more critical of others and themselves. They ask fewer questions. They often wreck a friendship by saying mean or obnoxious things. It has been said that there is no life so empty as a self-centered life, and there's no life so centered as a self-emptied life. Here we go. Next one, unfriendly. It's not up there. But how many of you know there's some people that are lonely just because they're just mean people? How many of you ever met just a mean person? How many of you are friends with them? That's the reason they're lonely. It makes sense. That's common sense. I mean, there's some people that even say that churches are unfriendly and stuff, but if you see them, and sometimes in churches, they come in late and they leave early, and they're like, man, that's the most unfriendly church. I'm like, I'll leave it there. The writer of the book of Proverbs asserted Proverbs 18:24 says, a man that has friends must show himself friendly. Next is impersonal society. How many of you know that every year that we go through society, the things are happening that we're becoming more and more impersonal? We have phones, we have technology, we have emails, we have all those kind of things. And so we don't have a relationship base, so we have lonely people. I'm getting to the good stuff here in a minute. The next thing is sin. Obviously, sin is the real cause of loneliness. How many of you know that Adam and Eve, after they sinned, they felt pretty horrible? Actually, they actually hid themselves. They wanted to isolate themselves because they felt bad. If we have sin in our life, it can be the very reason that that you are feeling lonely, because sin always separates us and always brings death to personal relationships. For the person that does not know Jesus, they're going to feel lonely. Here we go. Are y'all still with me? I know I keep saying here we go, but are y'all still with me? I'm teaching a little bit here. Unhealthy ways to deal with loneliness. Here we go. If you are lonely today, don't deny it. If you're dealing with anything today, don't deny it. If you deny it, you'll just keep denying it over and over and over, and you will never fix it. Be real with yourself. If you're feeling lonely and you're having some feelings that you need to fix, be honest about it. Number 2, busyness. Some people say, well, if I can keep busy, I'll be okay. Listen to me. If you are busy, busyness will be fine until it gets to the point, it's like a snowball effect. You can only be busy so long before something blows up in your life. Busyness doesn't fix the problem. Busyness doesn't fix the issue. The reason you're lonely is because there's an issue there that needs to be fixed. And so business, one day you're going to have a place that you're not going to be busy anymore. There's nothing else to do. And then you're still going to be lonely. Okay, y'all with me? Next is this substance abuse. All you're going to do is cope with the problem. You're going to learn to medicate the problem. You're not going to fix the problem. The whole point about being lonely is to fix the problem, is fix those relationships, fix those things in your life. Don't go out and try to medicate it to make you feel better, because when you wake up from whatever you just medicated yourself with, the loneliness will still be there, and that will start a snowball effect where you won't be able to control. The other thing is, don't overeat. It's COVID. I told you, some of you know that I used to weigh 450 pounds. I was living large. And I told you before, I used to go to Kroger. Man, I used to go in the church van. I used to get me a half a gallon of milk and a cake. Not a piece of cake, a cake. Because I was stressed. I felt lonely. I was depressed in some ways. It was good, though. But it didn't fix my problem. Next thing is finding somebody else. Some people feel like they're lonely. They're going to go out and switch partners. They're going to switch friends. They're going to change their whole life around. Let me just tell you that never fixes anything either. The worst thing you could do is find somebody else and get married into a different situation that you're still lonely, and you may be the cause of the first problem in the first place because you never fixed the issue. So you think, well, if I can fix somebody else, I'm never going to be lonely again. Like I said, you can be in a whole crowded room and still be lonely. You can be in a different marriage with somebody else and still feel lonely. The whole part of it is to fix the issue. Don't switch things and say, well, if I change my environment, it's going to get better. It won't get better because the issue's there. It's always the root. You have to go to the root. You have to go to the root. Always. You can't find somebody else. The next thing is what happens is possessiveness. Some people attach themselves to others, and in the process, the other person feels smothered. How many of you ever had somebody possess you? I'm not talking craziness. I'm just saying, how many of you ever felt smothered? How long did you stay with that person who smothered you? Man, y'all are doing good. Y'all got some good friends. But sometimes when they feel lonely, they attach themselves to you, and you can't go anywhere. They have to follow you and find out what you're doing, and always up in your business to the point where it gets crazy, and you're like, hey, stay away. And the reason that they're lonely is because they have smothered other people because they haven't fixed the issue. We're about to get into how you can fix all this stuff. And I put counseling because let me just tell you this. I agree in counseling. I think counseling is great if you need to go talk through some issues, but make sure you're going to a Christian counselor because it's always the root of the issue. Because if you don't go to a Christian counselor, they may just medicate you to the point where you don't feel anything. That's not going to help you. So make sure you're going to a Christian counselor. Here we go. Next thing is suicide. A lot of time, loneliness and different other things that we go through in our life, sometimes one of the options that people feel like they have is suicide. And let me just tell you, that doesn't fix any issue either. That doesn't fix the issue. People that commit suicide think that no one cares about them and no one understands them. They are the characteristics of loneliness. It is interesting to note that, listen to me, listen to this, that 50% of people who have had a heart attack confess that they were feeling depressed and lonely when they had their heart attack. So what do we do? I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes here on this. When something that we own is broke, we consult to the original manufacturer. In our lives, when we're feeling lonely, we're feeling depressed, we're feeling like nothing's going to happen, we need to go back to the person who made us. He knows how our body, our minds, our hearts work. We have to go back to the original manufacturer, so we need to turn to Jesus. Proverbs 18:24, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Jesus is our greatest friend. David wrote this. He said in Psalms 27:10, though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. David observed that sometimes the most important people in our life walk away from us, but he will step in at those moments. Psalms 139:7-10 says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold fast to me. Let me just tell you this. Do you feel alone when you hear a scripture like that? It says, where can I go that he is not there? If I go to the depths, if I go to the heights, if I go to the side, if I try to hide in a cave, if I do all those kind of things, there's no place that he is not there. Jesus himself promises abiding presence in Matthew 28:20. It says, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. John 14:18 says, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. The writer of the book of Hebrews reminds us of God's promise to be faithful to us. Hebrews 13:5, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. We need to realize that the Bible says about Jesus' relationship with believers. Consider the following. These are some things that I wrote down. Jesus said that we are his friends, John 15:9-11-15. He doesn't just call us up, he calls us his friends. Jesus says that he loves us, John 3:16, 15-9, 1 John 4:9-10. Jesus said that he knows our names. How many of you know that he knows exactly who you are? He knows your name. He knew you before you were born. He helped knit you in your mother's womb. He knows exactly who you are. I said it on Wednesday night. It says that he will not give us any temptation or anything that we cannot bear. Let me just tell you this. He knows exactly at your breaking point. He knows exactly how far you can go and be stretched before he comes to your rescue. He says he will not give you anything before you were born that he could not take care of. He knows exactly where you're at. He knows exactly what the enemy is trying to do and stretch you to the breaking point. He knows exactly those things. But he says he would not give us anything that he knew that we could not overcome. You're not going to anything that you can't overcome. If you've been lonely, you've been depressed, then you may have done this for years. You may have developed doubts. He knew that about you, so he's already given you an answer. He has given him himself. I'm saying, are you seeking him? Are you going after him? Here we go. Jesus is praying for us. He says that he just doesn't know us, but he says he is praying for us in John 17:9 and Hebrews 4:15-16. Jesus wants us to be with him in heaven. Some of you have gone through some stuff. You've seen some things in this world that I could not even imagine. Some of you have been in the military. Some of you had things happen to your life. But I do know one thing, that he says that he can renew your mind. He can turn a heart that he said that is made out of stone, he can make it flesh again, that he can mend and deal with. Every calloused heart, every wound, every hurt that you've been through in your life, he can grab it up. He never leaves any pieces, even when he fed the 4,000 and 5,000. You may think, well, that's just a metaphor. I'm just saying that he told them to gather up all the pieces. He doesn't leave anybody broken out on the field. That he's there for you right now. Jesus said that God the Father loves us as much as he loves his own son, John 17:23. So if you're dealing with loneliness, let me give you some advice. Here we go. You need to readjust your rearview mirror. Lonely people have a natural tendency to retreat to the past. They try to recapture the feelings of happier times with people that are no longer a part of their lives. They're always remembering. You're always trying to recapture something that's not there anymore. I'm telling you, you need to readjust that mirror. You cannot drive through life looking in the rearview mirror without crashing. If all you're looking at is the past of your life, then you're going to crash eventually. God in Isaiah 43, 18 and 19, forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. He wants to do a new thing in your life. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Number two, most people who are lonely in their life, these are just very simple things, but they have yet to have a daily quiet time with the Lord. When I counsel people and I talk to people about things, one of the things I always ask them, I say, hey, do you have a time with the Lord? Most of them say, well, I've been trying. And I'm not faulting them for that, but I'm just telling you, one of the things to get you out of the slump is whatever you're putting in has to be more encouraging than what you've been putting in. If you're sitting around listening to music because it makes you feel better, make sure it's Christian music. Make sure it's going to uplift you. It's going to bring you up. Look at your circle of friends. We've talked about circle of friends before, but if your 4 friends are just as depressed as you are, you might want to find some different friends. I've had some people in my life that I have gone through, and before I know it, I've hung out with them. And before I've got to that whole thing, I have not even got to the close to being uplifted, because all we talked about was how good things used to be. But I didn't have a future. Number 3, a daily quiet time of just reading and asking God. In Hebrews 4:16 says, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Spend time in His Word. I read an article this week that said 93% of lonely and depressed Christians admit spending less than an hour per reading or studying the Bible. The Word of God cleanses our minds and reminds us of the promises of God, how faithful He has been, what He promised us. Number 4 is develop friendships. A friend is someone who's there for you when you need them. Acquaintances will step out of your life in tough times. You need to find some friends in your life. Not friends that agree with you, but friends that are willing to speak the truth in your life. That is a true friend, that somebody wants to speak the truth in your life in love. Learn to be content. Paul was in prison. I told you, Paul went through a dark time in his life, but he says, Paul confessed to the saints at Philippi. Philippians 4:11, it says, I am not saying this because I am in need. If I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Sometimes a lack of commitment and loneliness are an inseparable link. Learning to be content will go a long way in solving the problems of loneliness. Just being content in the situation you have and seeing how blessed you are and what God has brought you through and where He wants to take you. And this next one is very important. Invest your life in serving others. It's amazing when you invest your life and you reach out to somebody else that is in a bind, it'll get yourself looking out of your own circumstances, of your own problems, your own situations. And you'll see that your life may not be as bad as somebody else's. You think your life is rough? I'm asking you, look around the world at a country besides America, in a third world country, and see, does your life really that bad? In fact, you don't have to go to a third world country. You can't do it right now, but I encourage you to walk down the cancer wing of one of these hospitals. Go to St. Jude Children's Hospital. See those kids laying in bed, and yet some of those people, some of those kids, they're not lonely. Because sometimes it's all in our mind. Because loneliness is a state of mind. Help somebody. Allow yourself to make new friends. Overcome the feelings that no one needs you. And lastly, share the burdens of life with other people. Paul advised the Galatian believers to share their burdens with each other. Galatians 6:2, it says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Well, you think, Pastor John, you're saying all these things, but what do I need to do if I'm feeling lonely? I'm telling you, go back to the manufacturer. Ask yourself and be real with yourself. Am I pushing people away? Am I causing my loneliness? Am I wanting to be lonely? Am I wanting to live in the situation I'm in, or are you wanting to change? Because the only way that you ever change in life is the want to. You always have to want to change. You always want to be better than you are. You want to try to push yourself. You need to try to work in those areas. Like I said, some of you need to just go and just sit down with somebody that's a good friend and say, hey, look, I'm dealing with it. You need to have some accountability, somebody that's going to lift you up. Some of you are thinking about some things that have happened to you in your past. My life is a statistic. My grandfather did crazy things to me in my life. And I'm not trying to bring that up, but some of you don't know. For 3 years of my life. My dad didn't show a lot of love, but he did. I shouldn't be standing here preaching the gospel. But God did something in my life. And I didn't tell a whole lot of people about that. It happened when I was in those years, but until 19, God said, hey, I want that little part of your life too. I hadn't told anybody about it. See, I know what it is to be lonely and yet be surrounded by people. I know what it is to go through a scar and a hurt and a pain that nobody should ever have to live with. But I know the loving help of a Father who restored, that allowed something in my heart that was wounded and hurt. And the enemy would always pick at it. I always felt ashamed, and he allowed it to heal. And he brought me to the place I am today. So I'm not just talking about you, if you feel that way, of something that I don't understand, because I do understand. But I know there's hope for you today.